Addicted to Her Memories by Javier Lestanow. I am writing this from rehab as part of my therapy. It is a pretty high-end facility, but I can afford it, and frankly, I cannot afford to skimp on taking care right now. I need nutritional help, physical therapy, psychological treatment, and above all, lots of 24/7 supervision. I was only an addict for a few weeks, maybe a few months, I'm not quite sure, but it ravaged me and left very little behind. This, after an entire lifetime of escaping the consequences of my actions. I was a young adult in the 90s and involved in the punk, metal, and grudge scenes, which were kind of the same thing back then. I never really had any talent, but I had my father's money and I could turn a few $1,000s into a concert, after party, drugs, and meaningless hookups and somehow end up with more money than when I started. I had a knack for business, and I knew everyone on the scene. Not just the bands, but also the club owners, drug dealers, sex workers, and rich people looking to party like rock stars. I mostly met them through my father's financial firm where I worked as a junior trader. I guess you could call my story a bootstraps one, but I was not a fuck-up either. I always took something out of every trade. I always got a few dollars, a few grams, a little fun, or a useful contact. Others could not really hang, though, and people started to fall out of my life. Overdose, bankruptcy, prison, rehab. All of the above in many cases. I found myself getting older while the scene continually replenished itself with fresh young faces. I saw nu metal, screamo, metalcore, and deathcore pass through the clubs and galleries I would eventually come to own. I threw so many benefits and memorials for kids on the scene that they all blended together. It was at one such show that I met her. It was a gallery showing, auctioning off paintings to rich people to benefit a local band whose singer was in a coma after a drunk driving accident. Lots of suits and ties, but also lots of wealthy Gen X people who survived the decades and still had a gothy and punky edge in their 40s and 50s. But I kept seeing this girl. Short skirt and a military surplus jacket, with a beautiful smile and lots of pain in her eyes. She was magnetic, charismatic, and tragically compelling. I made a point of talking to her, and I found out that she was in fact homeless, couch surfing, but not really knowing anyone with a couch. She had moved to the city looking to get away from her hometown, but things were just not working out for her. I told her that I had a couch and got her a glass of champagne. Later that night, I would see her emerge from the bathroom at my condo, freshly showered and wrapped in one of my nice towels I put out when I'm expecting guests. She went over to her bag, I assumed for a change of clothes, but instead she sat next to me with a baggie and a syringe. I do not have an addictive personality, but I also have had a hard time saying no. I do not mess with needles, so I snorted a little bit and then watched her cook and shoot up. I always felt guilty doing this, being able to dabble in a drug that ruined the lives of many people I knew, and doing so without getting hooked. One more privilege I was born with, one more consequence that would never catch up to me. She stood up and dropped her towel, exposing a very lean and attractive body. Honestly, I would have been okay with her just spending the night on my couch. That is the way these things often go, but I'm never one to turn down a good thing. A wonderful thing, actually. Our night together somehow stood out as memorable among a long life of meaningless hookups. It was not anything she did or I did, but who we were together. I gave her my business card the next morning and told her that I would always be around while she gets her living situation figured out. And then she never called. And for the first time, I found myself missing somebody, craving somebody. I didn't know her name, but I knew there was chemistry with this person who was half my age. I had a dumb fantasy about explaining my young girlfriend to my cynical Gen X friends. who would point out that they have kids her age graduating college this year. This daydream would make me laugh, and it would make me feel lonely. Then I got the call, not from her, but from the coroner. Apparently, the police raided some basement party, and when they broke down the bathroom door, they found her overdosed. They were calling me because my business card was the only thing they had to go on, and it was not the first time I had been brought in to identify some poor kid living on the margins of the scene. Through a private investigator, I found out her name was Gloria, and she had been on her own for years, moving from city to city. They were able to find her dad, but he wanted nothing to do with this and kept hanging up on the investigator. So I took on the responsibility of making arrangements and having her cremated. When all the research and transactions and organizing was over, I was left sad and lonely with an urn. I was not a fan of grief, so I did everything I could to get drunk and numb, but I kept feeling her absence in my system. For once, I was like a junkie, craving something, having irrational junkie thoughts. I had a perverse idea that I felt would be like a tribute to the night we met. A perverse idea that I could not get out of my head. I went over to the urn and scattered a little bit of her ashes on my coffee table and snorted them. It was bitter, not just the taste in my sinus, but the feeling, intense dread and shivers, and my heart started to beat out of control. It was a heart attack, I was sure, or at least a panic attack. I regretted this stupid stunt instantly and tried to calm my heart through controlled breathing. I was successful, and yet I felt a whole separate heart beating out of control. It was her heart, and her memories. I was living out her overdose in reverse, and I felt sick and tired and full of fear. We had made a terrible mistake. I rode that experience for what felt like forever, and eventually it mellowed out into a sense of euphoria. I had little fragments of memories and experiences of what she had gone through in the last few days of her life. A nice boy that she had kissed that seemed to genuinely want to help her and was not predatory or manipulative. Wait, was I predatory? Did she see me that way? Either way, other happy memories bubbled up, like some delicious pizza she bought after singing on the streets for money. I discovered she had the voice of a choir kid who had missed the last few hundred church services. That voice had filled me like I was a cathedral constructed to echo and amplify it. I sang along, tone deaf, which is the reason I was never allowed to join any bands. When I came out of it, I did not have much of an appetite, nor did I feel particularly tired. Honestly, I just wanted to go and taste those ashes again. I resisted the urge. I had never been one to party the next day when work needed to be done. This is the discipline that kept my life moving forward when many others lost momentum and even came to a stop. At my office above a gallery, I booked a show in some new electronic genre that I honestly could not wrap my head around. It felt old, and somehow not the type of old I was. It was nostalgic for the early 2000s. God, it had been 24 years since the year 2000. I was feeling out of touch and depressed, just some asshole that young people have to deal with if they want to make art. I left early wanting to feel young, wanting to feel her. Soon I was under the covers, feeling her memories spread through my body, feeling her youth and vitality fill me. We reached the memory of that night we spent together, and I was able to confirm that she did not hate me. She was not disgusted by me. She just saw me as a means to an end, as a warm bath and a soft bed, and someone to party with who was not really threatening. We got to the part where we had sex, and I felt her sensation in my body. After a minute of my hand traveling down to join in, but just like that, her sensations were over, as I had barely lasted that night before rolling over and passing out, was not how I remembered it. It was so disappointing. She was somewhat relieved as she raided my fridge and liquor cabinet before lying back down next to me. I became somewhat of a recluse over the next few days or weeks. I'm not quite sure. I explored her memories, barely eating and barely sleeping. My ego was completely eroded from the experience, my sense of self worn down. I was a vessel for her, and my perception of myself was that I was just a page in her story. I saw her try to get a degree and earn a living while struggling with on and off homelessness, and the relief she felt when she finally gave up. I felt her voice singing many times, and had I known that side of her, I would have gotten her gigs at my properties. But she did not think she was good enough. Another trait that started to rub off onto me. The more of her I used, the more I was able to travel backwards, until I hit a really dark spot. A spot where she was very young, very vulnerable, and constantly the target of violence at home. Highs of singing at church, broken up by very extreme lows of depression and suicidal thoughts. All to escape a father that regularly beat her and threatened her every chance he got. She needed to escape, and she did. She got pretty far away, but ultimately did not make it. I was full of anger, our anger, and as the high wore off, I realized I was not powerless. I was a wealthy grown man. I took a couple of greyhounds and made my way to her hometown. It was a blur. A lot of the time I was not really there. I was lost in her memories, which kept the rage boiling hot, which kept me moving forward despite barely eating or sleeping. After arriving in her hometown, I went to the address my private investigator gave me. I would watch that shitty old house and stalk the person living there until I was able to get a good look at him. He was older, changed by the years, but still very much our tormentor. That night, I would ambush him as he drunkenly stumbled home from a bar. It was messy. Him in a drunken stupor. Me feeble from weeks of not taking care of myself. It took so many stabs. More than I could possibly count or remember. I remember so few details about that night. Just that it was much harder than I thought it would be. On the bus ride back, I would wake up panicking that he was still alive. But it was just a memory. The memories of his abuse felt so much more real and fresh than the memory of his death. Shortly after getting home, I checked myself into rehab because somehow I had gone through all the ashes. I finally understood how rock stars could have $1,000,000 drug habits. It is not until you have made your way through 4 pounds of ashes that you realize how far gone you are. I contemplated death a lot. I knew I could handle it. I had already experienced it once. But a little bit of my ego started to grow back and heal, and I got an urge to go back to work. But if I was going to work, if this was going to work, I had to get healthy. I wanted to start a charity to make care like this available to poor people like her. The challenge was not going to be learning to live without her. It was going to be creating a life that honored the memory of her within me. Alright guys, thank you for listening to that. I hope you all enjoyed it. I thought that was a pretty well put together story, just in general. Wasn't exactly scary or anything, but having dealt with a lot of addiction stuff in my family in the past, like, I don't know, I identified with the story. You guys let me know what you think in the comments. like, subscribe, do all that stuff, share it. I don't know. And go check out the author on Reddit. Put a link in the description. And thank you guys. Farewell until next time. Fart noise.